My name is Sadie. I'm 27 years old, and this is what really happened. A gray October morning settled over the cemetery outside Columbus, like wet wool pulled across the sky. Cold wind moved through rows of black umbrellas and dark coats, carrying the smell of damp soil, cedar mulch, and candle smoke drifting from the little white chapel near the graveside. Gravel snapped under polished shoes. Programs fluttered in restless hands. A child somewhere near the back was being shushed in a whisper so tight it sounded like a prayer forced through clenched teeth. I stood near the last row with my hands buried inside my coat sleeves, trying to push warmth back into fingers that had gone numb on the drive over. From where I was, I could see the polished oak casket, the spray of white lilies, the military flag folded with careful precision, and the single chair placed nearest to Grandpa's coffin. It was the seat he had asked me to take, not in a sentimental way. Not the kind of dramatic request people make when they want tears and promises. He had said it the way he talked about changing the batteries in the smoke detector or rotating his tires before the first freeze. Flat. Clear. Already decided. One Tuesday afternoon, I was at his kitchen table sorting pills into those plastic day-of-the-week boxes, and he looked up from his coffee and said, "When they bury me, the chair beside me is yours." My sister was already sitting in it. Lila wore a fitted black dress, and pearl earrings like grief had given her a dress code, and she was determined to outperform the room. Her head stayed bowed at a careful angle, chin lowered just enough to suggest sorrow without ruining her makeup. One hand held the funeral program to her chest. The other rested near the edge of the casket, like closeness was something she had earned. My mother leaned toward her every few seconds to smooth back a strand of hair, press a tissue into her hand, squeeze her wrist. My father stood behind her with one palm on her shoulder in that steady, public way men use when they want people to notice they are being strong. No one looked at me. Not when I walked in from the parking lot with a damp hem and mud on my boots. Not when the organ started. Not when Pastor Miller stepped to the pulpit. Not when the choir began Grandpa's favorite hymn in thin, trembling harmonies that made the air itself feel colder. I stood there and watched the chair that should have been mine turn into one more thing I was expected to swallow quietly for the sake of family peace. Then Pastor Miller stopped mid-service, glanced down at a small digital recorder in his hand, and said in a voice that cut through the chapel like a blade drawn slowly from a sheath, "Before he passed, Robert Walker asked me to play this message for his family." A soft click sounded through the speaker system. Then my grandfather's voice filled the room, rough and plain and impossible to ignore. Within seconds, my father dropped the little glass cup of water he had been holding from the refreshment table near the back wall. It hit the stone floor and shattered across the aisle. Even then, I did not move. The first thing Grandpa said on that recording was my name, not Lila's. Mine. That alone would have been enough to stun me. In my family, my name usually arrived second. Or last. Or, as a correction, after someone forgot I was in the room. Lila was the easy daughter. The presentable one. The bright one. The one strangers complimented and relatives remembered and my mother described with a tone usually reserved for good china. She was graceful. She was polished. She was photogenic. She was the kind of woman people called put together even when her life was quietly on fire. I was attached to smaller words. Quiet. Moody. Private. Hard to read. Stubborn. Too sensitive. Smart, but not in a way that impressed anybody at church luncheons. Lila was 2 years older than me, and she learned early how to turn attention into oxygen. She knew which smile melted my father. She knew what kind of tears brought my mother running. She knew how to apologize without surrendering anything, how to arrive late with a bakery pie and get credit for dinner, how to drift through a room collecting sympathy like static. She had a gift for performance that never looked like performance unless you stood close enough to see the seams. Grandpa saw them. He was not a dramatic man. He wore old flannel even when he had enough money to buy 10 better shirts. He saved rubber bands in a coffee tin, wrote checks at Walmart long after everybody else used cards, and kept every receipt folded into a kitchen drawer with a pencil stub and expired coupons. But he noticed things. He noticed who stayed after the meal, who asked how he really was, who knew where the spare batteries were, who called when there was no audience for kindness. He noticed who did the invisible work. When I was 12, my mother forgot to pick me up from choir rehearsal because Lila had a debate tournament and things got hectic. Madame Daniel Seymour Nand. I sat on the curb outside the middle school with a borrowed hoodie around my shoulders and a phone battery blinking red. It had gotten dark enough that the janitor came out once to ask whether someone was coming. I told him yes, even though I no longer believed it. Grandpa came instead. His old Buick rattled into the pickup lane with the heater blasting and a country station mumbling low through a fuzzy speaker. I climbed in, trying to act normal, trying not to cry, trying not to be the difficult daughter who made a scene out of being forgotten again. He handed me half a pack of peanut butter crackers from the glove box. Then he looked at me once and said, "You hungry or just disappointed?" I broke open so fast it embarrassed me. I covered my face and cried with those ugly, gulping breaths that make children feel humiliated by their own softness. He did not tell me to calm down. He did not tell me your mother didn't mean it. He did not lecture me about grace or understanding or how families get busy. He just drove. That was him. He never rushed me past the part that hurt just because he was uncomfortable looking at it. By the time I was in high school, comparison had become the native language in our house. Lila got praise. I got advice. Lila got celebrated for things I was expected to do quietly and correctly without needing applause. If I made honor roll, Mom said, "Good, keep that up." If Lila made honor roll, Dad took us to a steakhouse and acted like she had personally solved inflation. At Christmas, Lila got jewelry chosen with care. I got gift cards tucked into an envelope, sometimes with my name spelled wrong on the front if Mom was doing 3 things at once. On the 4th of July, Lila stood in the middle of the family photo under the string lights while I held paper plates near the cooler and got waved in at the last second. At Thanksgiving, my mother corrected the way I mashed potatoes and then called Lila's store-bought cranberry relish a lovely touch. It sounds petty if you list it too plainly. That is how small cruelties survive. They do not bruise. They pattern. They gather. They teach you exactly where you stand and dare you to call them what they are. I left home at 19 and rented a 1-bedroom apartment over a dentist's office in Columbus because it was cheap and close to the bus line. The pipes knocked all winter, the windows stuck every summer, and the building smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet no matter what season it was. I worked mornings at a small law office doing probate intake, and afternoons at a coffee place near campus where every custom drink order came with the emotional force of a hostage negotiation. I learned how to make rent stretch, how to say no to family obligations that only required my labor, and how to stop expecting warmth from people who had mistaken my silence for durability. Lila stayed close to home. She got married at 24 in a vineyard wedding my parents partly paid for, then divorced 18 months later in a way that somehow made her more sympathetic instead of less. She cycled through jobs and friendships and reinventions with the same theatrical exhaustion. Every setback became proof that she needed extra tenderness. My mother supplied it. My father financed it. If Lila had a flat tire, everyone moved. If I got the flu, Mom texted, "Hope you're resting and drinking fluids." Grandpa lived 40 minutes from my apartment, in a small brick ranch house at the edge of town. The neighborhood had mailboxes that leaned, strict HOA rules no one respected, and one man across the street who monitored garbage, timing like it was a federal assignment. When Grandma died, Grandpa got quieter, but he did not get soft. He still made his own eggs, still shuffled to the mailbox in house shoes, still kept his deed, military papers, and insurance documents inside a metal lockbox by the hall closet. I started going over every Sunday. At first it was lunch and nothing more, then grocery runs, then help with the things that had become annoying but not yet impossible, then the harder things. The things families talk around because naming them makes age feel like a verdict. The year his hands began shaking, I drove him to the DMV to renew his license, even though he already knew he probably wouldn't keep driving much longer. We sat in that fluorescent line with people sighing around us and a television in the corner muttering daytime nonsense. He wore his good jacket and kept grumbling that the government could ask for too much proof from a man who had been alive this long without once vanishing. Afterward, I bought him a sausage biscuit and coffee, and we sat in the car with the windows fogging while he told me stories about welding jobs, union men, and the girl he almost married in Kentucky before he met Grandma at a county fair. When his eyesight got worse, I read him his mail, insurance statements, social security notices, utility updates, property tax reminders, junk offers from roofing companies that somehow knew exactly when a man had become old enough to be targeted. He listened and told me where each piece belonged in the accordion folder, organized by year. When he fell in the laundry room and bruised his hip, I found him because I had stopped by early with soup. Not my mother, not Leela, me. He was angry in the emergency room, more angry than afraid, angry at his body, angry at the walker, angry at the way nurses started explaining things to me when he was still fully capable of understanding. Under those beige lights that make everyone look already halfway gone, he gripped my wrist and said, "Don't let them make me ornamental." I told him I wouldn't. He held me to that promise. My parents visited him, but the visits were all dressed-up versions of concern. Mom brought fruit trays he never touched and chatted about church gossip over his shoulder like he was a decorative lamp. Dad stayed exactly long enough to qualify as dutiful. Lila came in perfume and boots and giant sunglasses, posted a photo of her hand in his with a caption about cherishing family, and left before the Jell-O arrived. He showed me the post later on his phone. "Looks like she was here all day," he said. "She wasn't." "I know that," he muttered. That's the problem. He did not complain often, which made it heavier when he did. The last 2 years of his life burned away his patience for pretending. He began naming things in smaller, sharper ways. One rainy Saturday, I was at his kitchen table sorting medications into those little boxes while stew simmered on the stove and the old radio whispered farm reports into the room. He looked up from his crossword and said, "You know where I want you sitting when they bury me?" I laughed because I thought he was trying to get a rise out of me. He did not smile. "Beside me," he said. "Closest chair. Family can have their feelings. That seat is yours. Another dies highs here, and more tom more." I stopped with a bottle in my hand. "Grandpa, I'm serious. Why are you telling me this now?" "Because your mother will act surprised. Your sister will act wounded. Your father will act like he doesn't hear me. I'd rather say it while I can still repeat myself." I tried to soften it. "You're not going anywhere yet." He gave me a look that could sand varnish off wood. "Everybody is going somewhere," he said. "I just want a few things done properly." That afternoon, he walked me through the funeral home folder, the suit he wanted, the hymn list, which cousin should get his pocket knife, what should happen to Grandma's wedding Bible. He had labels on envelopes, notes clipped to documents, and a legal pad with names written in those square block letters that made everything look official. He was more organized than half the attorneys I worked for. Then he tapped one paper and said, "Pastor Miller has one more thing. That part stays with him." I asked what part. He said, "Insurance." That was not true. I knew it later. The final winter was slow and hard, the kind that creeps into bone and turns every trip from the bedroom to the bathroom into a negotiation. He stopped driving completely. I started coming by Wednesdays too, then Saturdays when the weather turned mean. I picked up prescriptions, scrubbed his tub, reset the breaker when half the kitchen went dark, and brought him tomato soup in mason jars because canned soup had started tasting metallic to him near the end. A week before Christmas, I helped him mail cards. My mother never came by that day because Lila had some holiday event at a country club bar and needed help finding the right earrings. I know because Mom called while Grandpa and I were icing sugar cookies at the kitchen table. "Can you stop by later?" she asked. Lila's stressed. I looked at Grandpa in his thick cardigan, carefully dragging red icing over a crooked tree shape. "I'm with Grandpa." "I know, but Lila really needs support tonight." I almost laughed. Instead I said, "So does he." There was a pause long enough to let the truth stand there without a coat. Then Mom said, colder, "Your sister has always been more open about needing people." I stared at the cookie in my hand. Grandpa kept frosting without looking up. After I hung up, he said, "That sentence ought to win an award." He said it so dry I finally did laugh, and he smiled without lifting his head. He was admitted to Riverside Methodist in late February after trouble breathing turned suddenly bad. By then, he was tired in a way that had no argument left in it. Hospital blankets make everything feel temporary. Machines do too. My father came the first day, stayed 45 minutes, and took 2 work calls in the hallway. My mother visited twice and asked a nurse whether there was a more comfortable chair for family. Lila arrived once with flowers that shed pollen on the windowsill and asked whether he wanted her to post an update because people are asking. He told her no. She posted anyway. A cousin sent me the screenshot. Grandpa held on for 12 days. On the 10th night, after I had bought stale coffee from the vending machine and paid another parking ticket at the kiosk, he motioned me closer. The room was dark except for the monitor glow and the faint blue wash of snow outside the window. His voice came thin through the oxygen, but his eyes were clear. "You let people tell the story long enough," he whispered. "They start charging rent for it." I bent close enough to smell the medicated dryness on his skin. Don't fight for a chair, Sadie. Let them show themselves." I nodded because he was tired and because I did not understand enough yet to ask the right questions. He squeezed my fingers once, harder than he had in weeks. That was the last full sentence he said to me. He died the next morning before sunrise. Everything after that moved with the ugly speed grief takes on when controlling people discover logistics. My mother became suddenly tireless, calling florists, choosing casket wood, arguing about lilies versus roses, coordinating prayer cards, discussing family dignity with the solemn energy of a campaign manager. Lila attached herself to every visible decision like grief was a stage production, and she had secured a lead role. I was included only when labor was required. "Can you pick up extra photos from Walgreens? Need you to meet the florist because Dad's tied up. Do you know where Grandpa kept his military picture? Can you bring 3 extension cords to the church hall?" No one asked how I was sleeping. No one asked whether I wanted anything from the hospital bag still sitting in my apartment by the door with his glasses case inside. No one asked whether I had eaten or whether I could stand to hear strangers call Lila so devoted for wearing waterproof mascara and nodding at the right moments. At the viewing, people kept drifting toward her because my mother had told half the church she was taking this especially hard. Lila accepted condolences with the polished exhaustion of a woman receiving a humanitarian award. I kept refilling the water table and straightening framed photos because apparently that was my lane. An older cousin named Denise found me by the photo board I had assembled alone the night before. "You okay, honey?" I looked at the collage. Grandpa teaching me to fish at 8. Grandpa at my high school graduation because my father got stuck in traffic and missed my name being called. Grandpa on his porch swing with peach pie balanced on one knee and his cap tipped back. "I will be," I said. Denise glanced over at Lila, surrounded by murmurs and tissues. You were there a lot. It hit me like a hand pressed gently to the center of my back. Yes. I noticed. That mattered more than it should have. By the time the funeral began the next morning, I was so hollowed out by exhaustion and anger that the sight of Lila in my chair did not produce the scene my mother probably expected from me. It produced something colder, a kind of final understanding. Grandpa had been right. If I argued, they would call it selfish. If I reached for the seat, Lila would go glassy-eyed and wounded. Mom would rush in to protect her. Dad would warn me not to make a scene, and somehow I would once again become the difficult one in a story they had rehearsed for years. So I stayed where I was. Pastor Miller moved through scripture. The choir sang. The windows of the chapel blurred with cold. A woman behind me kept unwrapping peppermint candy in careful little crackles. Lila dabbed one eye. My mother touched her knee. My father stared ahead with the expression he wore in bank lobbies and waiting rooms, the face of a man trying to look respectable under pressure. Then Pastor Miller stopped and lifted the recorder. Then Grandpa's voice came through the speakers. "If you're hearing this," he said, "then I have managed to avoid one more church potluck, and for that alone I ask the Lord's mercy." A few startled sounds broke around the chapel, those half-laughs grief drags out of people against their will. Then his voice sharpened. "I know my family, so I am not leaving this part to interpretation." The whole room changed, not like thunder, more like a draft slipping into a warm house and making everyone aware of a crack they had ignored. "I want my granddaughter Sadie Walker sitting beside my casket during this service," he said. That seat was reserved for her because she sat beside me when being near me was work. My mother turned so fast the movement looked painful. I did not move. "I do not mean holiday visits," Grandpa said. "I do not mean photo visits. I do not mean stopping by 15 minutes in clean clothes and posting about family blessings on the drive home. Maddie's and I, Maddie." The pews shifted. You could hear fabric, breath, one muffled throat clear halfway cut off. "I mean the real thing. Sadie took me to the doctor. Sadie read my mail when my eyes stopped cooperating. Sadie handled the pharmacy, the groceries, the bills on bad days, the walk out front after snow, and the emergency room chairs nobody wants to remember." My father's hand slid off Lila's shoulder. "Some people in this room may be surprised by that," Grandpa said. "That only tells me how little they were paying attention." The words moved through the chapel without rush or mercy. Pastor Miller stood still as stone. My mother's mouth opened and closed. Lila's face went rigid in a way I had never seen. My father was gripping that tiny glass cup without seeming to know it. "I loved my family," Grandpa said, "but love is not blindness. I watched people get praised for appearances while the person doing the carrying was left standing in the hallway. I watched one granddaughter become a performance and another become a habit nobody thought to thank. I know in dumb way, damned. Lila whispered. "Oh my God." It was the first honest thing she had said all morning. Then Grandpa said her name. "Lila, I hope one day you learn the difference between being seen and being known. They are not the same." Anai. That line landed so cleanly the silence around it felt carved. Lila's chin trembled. For once it was not controlled. She had prepared for admiration, maybe even for sentimental praise. She had not prepared for public accuracy. Then Grandpa said my mother's name. "Donna, you loved ease too much. You mistook the child who asked less for the child who needed less." My mother sat down like her knees had forgotten their job. Then my father. "And Martin, you always respected whatever looked polished. I wish you had respected loyalty half as much." And The glass slipped from his hand and shattered across the stone floor. No one bent to clean it. Grandpa's voice kept coming, steady as if from the kitchen table. "Sadie, if this is hard to hear in public, forgive me. Private truth never traveled well in this family." My throat closed so hard I thought I might be sick. He had thought even of that. My embarrassment. My instinct to hide. He knew me so exactly it hurt. "You were with me when my hands shook. You were with me when the bills confused me. You were with me when I was angry, embarrassed, tired, and no good company. You never made me audition for care." I pressed my fingers into my sleeves until the seams bit my skin. "You were never hard to love," he said. "They were just lazy with their vision. There are sentences that comfort you, and sentences that rebuild something in you that has been quietly broken for years. That one did the second thing. I felt it like a door opening in a locked room." He cleared his throat on the recording. "The lawyer will explain the rest after the burial, but I want it known that my estate was settled according to who showed up with a whole heart, not according to image, not according to old assumptions, not according to who expected first place by tradition." The chapel felt airless. "And if anybody gives Sadie trouble about my house," he added, "they can explain themselves in probate court." Even Pastor Miller almost smiled at that. Then the recording clicked off. The silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt occupied. By truth. By witness. by all the things people had spent years arranging around until a dead man forced them to stand still and face the center. Lila stood up slowly from the chair beside the casket, not in defiance, not gracefully. She simply stepped back, stripped of atmosphere at last, and for the first time in my life, she looked exactly like what she was, a woman in a black dress who had mistaken attention for moral weight. Pastor Miller lowered the recorder. Then he looked directly at me and said, "I believe we should honor Robert's request." His voice softened. "Sadie, would you come forward?" Every face turned. People imagine moments like that as triumph. They are not. They are grief walking through a lane of consequences, while everyone watches. My legs felt hollow. I could hear the brush of my coat against my dress as I stepped out. The aisle seemed longer than it had before. I did not look at my parents. I did not look at Lila. I kept my eyes on the casket, on the lilies, on the edge of the folded flag, on the place where Grandpa had told me I belonged. When I reached the front, Lila moved aside without a word. I sat. The wood of the casket was so near, I could have laid my hand against it. I did once. Briefly. Light from the stained glass window touched the silver handles and the white petals and the dark polish in a way so gentle it nearly undid me. I thought wildly and uselessly that I wanted one more Tuesday at his kitchen table, one more grocery list, one more complaint about tomato prices, one more drive with the radio low. Grief is cruelest in its simplicity. It does not ask for miracles. It asks for ordinary days back. Pastor Miller resumed the service, but the shape of it had changed. Family remarks were quietly canceled. Smart decision. There are moments after which more performance becomes indecent. At the graveside, the wind came harder, wet earth, cold metal from the folding chairs, the smell of grass bruised under too many careful feet. My mother cried now with sound in it, loud enough to attract attention, but the tone had changed. Not pure grief. Exposure has its own weather. Twice my father tried to edge near me. Twice another relative drifted into the space between us, not dramatically, just enough to make a boundary visible. Denise once. My cousin Aaron once. People do that when a story changes. They start arranging themselves around the truth before they fully know how to speak it. After the burial, everyone drove to the church fellowship hall for the meal and the legal reading, because that is how these things go in Ohio. Ham trays, green beans, sheet cake, paper cups, crockpots humming under fluorescent lights while sorrow tries to behave itself beside coffee urns and bulletin boards about canned food drives. I stood near the wall beneath a poster for the Youth Mission fundraiser while people approached me one by one. Denise hugged me first and whispered, "He wanted them to know." Aaron said, "I had no idea you were doing all that for him." One of Grandpa's friends from the veterans group took my hand in both of his and said, "He talked about you constantly." That one almost buckled me. I had to look down for a second, nod, breathe. Across the room, Lila stood near the dessert table with a face arranged into affronted disbelief, while the sympathy around her thinned into caution. My mother kept trying to speak to people and losing her thread halfway through. My father stood near the coffee with both hands around a paper cup, like it was the only solid object left in the building. Then Richard Harlan arrived. He had been Grandpa's attorney for years. Tall, silver-haired, navy overcoat, leather briefcase, the kind of man who did not waste syllables and never needed to raise his voice to make a room obey. I had met him once before at Grandpa's dining room table when I walked in with groceries and found them discussing deeds and beneficiary forms over yellow legal pads. He nodded to me first. Then he asked Pastor Miller whether a side room was available. My mother followed him with the quick purpose of someone still believing logistics could save her. So did my father. Lila came too, spine straight, mascara repaired, jaw set. I stayed where I was until Mr. Harlan opened the fellowship room door and said, "Sadie, you should be present for this." Inside were 6 folding chairs, a long table, stale mints in a glass dish, and a church calendar with giant sunflowers on it. Mr. Harlan placed his briefcase down, removed a thick tabbed folder, and put on his glasses. My mother tried first. "I'm sure this is all very straightforward," she said with a smile that looked like it hurt. Mr. Harlan glanced at her over the frames. "It is," he said. He began with the formal language. State of Ohio, last will and testament, witnesses, notary, execution date, probate filing preparation. It all sounded almost boring for the first minute, which is how real damage often enters a room. Quietly, legally, without music. Then he read the first line that changed everything. "I appoint my granddaughter Sadie Elaine Walker as executor of my estate." Lila said, "What?" My father leaned forward so abruptly his chair creaked. Mr. Harlan continued, "The family residence on Briar Lane, including contents unless otherwise specified, is devised to Sadie Elaine Walker. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. The investment account ending in 4421, the certificates listed in Schedule B, and the proceeds from the sale of the undeveloped parcel in Union County are likewise transferred to Sadie Elaine Walker, subject to estate taxes and estate obligations." Lila's chair scraped back across the linoleum. "This is insane," she snapped. "There has to be some mistake." Mr. Harlan turned a page with no change in expression. There is no mistake, he went on. To my daughter Donna Walker Hayes, I leave my wedding Bible and family photo albums with the expectation they will be preserved rather than curated. My mother flinched as if the word itself had struck her. To my son-in-law Martin Hayes, I leave my tool chest and garage contents, since he admired them more than he used them. My father stared at the table. And to my granddaughter Lila Hayes, I leave $1 and my hope that she one day discovers character cannot be inherited. Lila let out a sound that was not quite a cry and not quite outrage. It was something rawer, a person discovering, in real time, that charm had no legal standing. That is cruel, she said. Mr. Harlan folded his hands. No, he said evenly. Cruel would have been leaving his intentions vague enough for conflict to multiply after his death. This was deliberate. I watched Lila's face and felt something strange. Not satisfaction, not exactly. More like the absence of an old fear. For years, she had moved through our family like weather everybody accommodated. That was gone now. Not because I had defeated her, because Grandpa had finally named the climate. My mother turned to me. Sadie, she said, voice shaking, you know this will tear the family apart. I answered before habit could soften me. No. This just named what was already there. Dad rubbed both hands over his face. Your grandfather was upset near the end. He muttered. He may not have been thinking clearly. Mr. Harlan opened another tab. These documents were executed 9 months ago at my office, he said. Your father-in-law was in full legal capacity. 2 witnesses. Notarized. Supplementary capacity notes are included. County record reference is attached. En annonsoren, an enan dewan line. That ended that argument so completely even my father seemed to hear it. Lila turned to me. You knew? I could have lied. Could have minimized, could have done what I had done all my life and made myself smaller to ease the temperature of the room. Instead, I said, not all of it. You let us walk into that blind? I looked straight at her. You took my seat at Grandpa's funeral. Her eyes narrowed. That chair meant nothing. It meant enough for you to grab it first. For once in her life, she had no script ready, no tears, no quick turn into victimhood that would bring my mother to her side and my father to her defense. The facts were too fresh and too witnessed. Even she could feel it. My mother started crying again, softer this time, less controlled. My father said, we are not discussing this here. Mr. Harlan closed the folder. I would strongly recommend, he said, that any further discussions about the estate come through my office. It was the cleanest threat I had ever heard spoken in a church. The meeting ended badly because there was no version of it that could have ended well. Lila stormed out first, heels cracking against the hallway tile. My mother sat for a moment longer, staring at the sunflower calendar like she had just discovered sunflowers could be hostile. My father tried to speak to me at the door and stopped when he saw my face. I drove to Grandpa's house alone that evening. The sky was turning cobalt. Porch lights were switching on one by one down the block. Someone, a few houses over, had put up Christmas lights obscenely early, and a blue strand blinked over a garage with all the confidence of a season arriving before permission. Grandpa's mailbox still leaned slightly left because he kept meaning to fix it when it got warmer. The wind chime on the porch moved once and fell still. I unlocked the front door with the spare key he had insisted I keep. Inside, the house smelled like old books, furniture polish, coffee, and him. That smell nearly dropped me where I stood. You can survive the public part, the funeral, the recording, the legal reading, the shattering of a family illusion. Then one ordinary smell undoes you because love lived there so long it left itself in the wood. I stood in the kitchen until my breathing steadied. The sugar jar was still by the stove. His reading glasses sat beside the radio. A stack of unopened mail waited in the tray by the fridge. The chair at the table still had his flannel hanging over the back like he had stepped outside for a minute and might come back asking whether I had found the soup crackers. Then I noticed an envelope taped beneath the cookie tin. My name was written on it in his square handwriting. I opened it with shaking fingers. Sadie, if you are standing in my kitchen after all this, sit down before you fall down. I sat. Inside was one sheet of paper. People who do the real work usually leave empty-handed unless somebody means to stop it. I meant to stop it. You do not owe guilt for receiving what was earned through presents. Take care of the house if you want it. Sell it if you don't. Keep the maple table. It has survived 4 bad decades and 1 Nixon bumper sticker. Do not let anybody use family as a crowbar. Love, Grandpa. I laughed through tears at the Nixon line because of course he would put a joke where another man might have placed a sermon. That was his way. Never sentimental when plain truth and one dry sentence could do more. I folded the note and held it to my chest until the room felt solid again. The weeks after were ugly in the administrative way death often is. Utility transfers, insurance calls, bank appointments, deed paperwork, probate filings, certified copies. I had seen that rhythm from the intake desk at the law office, but it felt different when my own name was on the forms, and the man whose signature I had watched deteriorate over the last year was suddenly a matter number in a county system. Mr. Harlan moved with elegant efficiency. I signed papers beneath framed diplomas and a flickering fluorescent light in his office while he explained timelines, tax estimates, notice procedures, and the likely emotional behavior of disappointed relatives. He said that last part dryly enough that I almost smiled. Mom called 11 times in 3 days. I answered once. "We need to talk as a family," she said. We had years to do that. Her breath caught. "You're punishing us. Now. I'm handling paperwork. Dadi, dai, dasi, danida." She started crying before I ended the call. Dad tried a different tone. His texts arrived clipped and practical. "We should be reasonable. The house is a lot to manage. Your grandfather wouldn't want distance." The last one almost made me throw the phone across the room. People love borrowing the dead when they run out of leverage. Lila went the predictable route. "I know you've always resented me." Her message began. That was enough. I archived it unread and went back to filling out a transfer affidavit. There were practical things to do. The furnace needed servicing. The back porch roof had a leak. The old boundary note on the rear fence line required an extra county filing. One Saturday, I spent 2 hours at the clerk's office behind a man arguing about fishing licenses and a woman renewing business forms. It should have felt miserable. Instead, it felt almost peaceful. Paperwork is honest. It tells you exactly what is true, what is owed, what remains. I kept the house, not because it was impressive. It wasn't. 2 bedrooms, low ceilings, basement that smelled like concrete and rain, one hallway closet that always stuck in humid weather. But it was his, and inside it I felt more known than I had ever felt in my parents' larger, prettier, colder home. I cleaned it slowly, one drawer at a time, one cabinet at a time, one shelf, one coat pocket. I found old seed packets, extra reading glasses, a pocket knife wrapped in a handkerchief, receipts from feed stores and hardware places, and a stack of birthday cards he had kept from me going back to when I was 13. He had saved everything I wrote him. Every crooked card, every short note, every grocery list I had scribbled and left on the counter. The hardest day was his dresser. The easiest was planting mums on the porch and realizing no one could tell me I was putting them in the wrong pot. About a month after the funeral, my parents showed up unannounced. I was on the porch in jeans and an old sweater with a mug of coffee and a booklet of paint samples spread across my lap. The afternoon was bright and cold. Leaves scraped along the curb in dry little bursts. Dad's truck rolled into the driveway with the heavy entitlement of something that had spent years being welcomed automatically. Mom got out first. Camel coat, hair sprayed into place. The face she wore when she wanted forgiveness to arrive ahead of accountability. "We just want to talk," she said. I did not invite them inside. Dad stayed half a step behind her with his hands in his jacket pockets, which told me everything. He was uncomfortable, maybe for the first time in his life in relation to me. Mom looked around the porch, the new mat, the cleaned railings, the potted mums. "This place looks nice." "Thank you." She swallowed. "We didn't know," she said quietly, "about how much you were doing for him." I thought of the early grocery runs, the pillboxes, the ER chairs, the cracked driveway after snow, the soup containers stacked in my sink, the mail read aloud, the hospital wristbands, the nights I left work early because he sounded off on the phone, the Sundays, the Wednesdays, the Saturdays. "You could have," I said. Her eyes lifted to mine. "You did know he needed help. You just assumed someone else would do it." Dad looked away toward the street like a man suddenly very interested in a passing Honda. Mom's voice got smaller. "We made mistakes." "Yes." No rescue, no softening, no quick line to let her feel absolved. Dad finally spoke. "Your grandfather was harsh." I set my mug down on the porch rail. He was clear. His jaw tightened. "We're still your family." I let the sentence sit between us until it lost the warmth he had tried to put into it and became what it really was, a claim, a habit, a key they thought still fit. "Family is not a coupon code," I said. "You don't get to pull it out when the bill shows up." Mom winced. Dad exhaled slow through his nose. Neither of them had come prepared for me not needing them. They stayed less than 10 minutes. Lila never came. She sent one final message through a cousin asking whether Grandpa's watch was part of the estate because it had special emotional value to her. Grandpa had left the watch to Aaron, who knew how to wind it and had actually spent more than one afternoon listening to stories at Grandpa's kitchen table. I told Mr. Harlan to answer. He did. By spring, the house had begun to feel less like a museum and more like mine. I repainted the kitchen a warm cream. I fixed the porch light. I had the maple table refinished and kept every scratch in the top because sanding away a life is not restoration, it's vanity. I started sleeping through the night more often. I kept Grandpa's radio by the stove and turned it on some mornings just to hear static before the farm report. At work, I took on more hours and eventually moved from probate intake to paralegal support because grief had made me less patient with nonsense and better at documents. There is something almost useful about having your illusions professionally removed. You stop wasting energy on what people say they mean and start paying attention to what they sign. Summer came slow and hot. The rose bush by the side fence survived. The neighbor across the street, the garbage can tyrant, turned out to be oddly kind once he realized I was staying. He brought me tomatoes in July and said Grandpa used to complain about my generation while secretly bragging about me to anyone trapped long enough on the sidewalk. That made me laugh so hard I had to lean on the porch rail. My mother kept trying in small ways. A casserole once, a church card, 2 texts on holidays. I answered some, ignored others. We had not become estranged dramatically. We had become honest, which is quieter and often more permanent. My father tried even less. One message about taxes, one about a tool he thought Grandpa might have wanted him to have. I forwarded that one to Mr. Harlan too, not because I was cruel, because I was done being worn down by the casual confidence with which my father treated my boundaries as temporary misunderstandings. Lila remained mostly silent, though silence from someone like her is never peace. It is recalculation. Word drifted through relatives that she was furious, that she called the funeral humiliating, that she told people Grandpa had been manipulated, that she cried at a women's Bible study and said inheritance reveals the worst in people. That part would have been funny if it were not so predictable. People who expect devotion without effort are always shocked when reality develops a paper trail. On the anniversary of Grandpa's funeral, I went to the cemetery alone. The grass had yellowed at the edges. A few small flags stirred near the veterans' stones. The wind was lighter than it had been a year before, but the day still carried that Ohio chill that lingers in the shade, even when the sun is trying. I brought a thermos of coffee and one of the folding chairs from Grandpa's garage. I sat by his grave and read the kitchen note again. Then I told him things. About the house. About the kitchen paint. About keeping the maple table. About the fact that the roses by the fence had survived another winter. About the county paperwork finally clearing. About learning the names of the neighbors he used to complain about sleeping better, about not apologizing so quickly anymore, about how strange it still felt to live inside a life where I was not the afterthought. No choir, no programs, no forced meal afterward under fluorescent lights. Just me, the sky, and the one person whose opinion had ever made me feel less invisible. I sat there a long time, and because grief changes shape when truth is allowed to stay true, what I felt was not only sadness, it was peace too. Not the glowing kind people write on sympathy cards. Real peace. The kind that comes when the story has finally been corrected and no one can drag it backward again. I used to think being overlooked meant being small. It doesn't. Sometimes it just means the people around you never learned how to look without greed, convenience, or vanity clouding the glass. Grandpa did. He saw me when I was 12 on the curb outside school, trying not to cry because being forgotten had become ordinary. He saw me when I was 19 carrying my own groceries up a narrow apartment staircase while my sister got brunch invitations and bailout money. He saw me in waiting rooms, in hardware aisles, in the pharmacy line, in his kitchen under bad fluorescent light while I sorted pills and read insurance letters and listened to him complain about soup brands and weather forecasts. He saw me before there was a deed or a will or a recording to prove anything. The recording did not create the truth. It only forced everyone else to hear it. That was enough. And enough, I learned, is a beautiful thing when it finally belongs to you. Grandpa's message did more than embarrass my family. It broke the old machinery. Before that day, every conflict in our house followed the same route. Lila acted first. Mom interpreted. Dad enforced. I absorbed. Even when I left home, even when I built my own routines and paid my own bills and learned how to make a life that did not depend on their approval, part of me still moved as if that system were law, still expected to lose if I spoke too plainly, still braced for being told I was overreacting, too quiet to understand, too emotional to be taken seriously, too practical to be lovable. Then a dead man with a cheap digital recorder and a better character than most people alive took that system apart in under 5 minutes. Sometimes I replay that morning in my head, not because I enjoy the humiliation on their faces, but because I still marvel at the simplicity of it. Grandpa did not yell. He did not dramatize. He did not build a case out of grand grievances and theatrical outrage. He just named what happened, named who showed up, named who was praised for performance, named who was left in the hallway holding all the actual weight. Truth rarely needs volume when it has detail. For months after, relatives called with versions of the same thing. I had no idea. He talked about you all the time. Your mother made it sound like Lila was the one helping. I guess we all assumed. That last sentence annoyed me most. Assumption is how neglect gets dressed up as innocence. People do not notice, because not noticing costs them nothing. It cost Grandpa. It cost me. It cost years. But the older I got into that new life, the less interested I became in collecting apologies. Most apologies in families like mine are really negotiations. They want you to accept the language of regret so everybody can skip the labor of change. They want access restored more than harm repaired. I stopped mistaking that for healing. That did not mean I hated them. Hatred is its own tether. It means I learned the difference between forgiveness and re-entry. My mother especially struggled with that. She wanted a soft focus reunion montage without the part where she had to look directly at who she had been. She wanted lunches and holiday invitations and slow emotional restoration under the banner of family. What she didn't seem to understand was that family had been the excuse under which most of the damage was done. One afternoon in late November, she called while I was at the hardware store choosing cabinet knobs. "Can we at least have dinner?" she asked. "The three of us?" "You mean the four of us?" A pause. "Yes, of course. All four. Entire Enedamans man mind." I looked at a row of brushed nickel handles and thought about every dinner table where Lila's stories got room and mine got interruptions. "No." She inhaled sharply. "Sadie, I'm not doing group performances anymore, Mom." It wouldn't be a performance. It always was. The silence after that was the most honest one we had ever shared. My father adapted differently. He shifted into politeness the way some men shift into weatherproofing. Formal messages, brief updates, no open conflict, no real accountability either. He called once to ask how the roof repair had gone because apparently he had heard about it from a neighbor before hearing it from me, and the tiny bruise to his pride sounded almost comic through the phone. "It's handled," I told him. "I could have come by." "I know." He waited for something else. A thank you, maybe. An invitation to reclaim usefulness where affection had failed. I gave him nothing. He said, "I suppose you don't need my help." The old me would have rushed to soothe that sentence, would have said something kind, something balancing, something meant to make him feel less accused by his own irrelevance. Instead I said, "No, I learned that a while ago." He was quiet for a second. Then he said goodbye and hung up. That should have felt like victory. It didn't. It felt like weather finally matching the forecast. As for Lila, I saw her twice the year after the funeral. Once at a grocery store, where she spotted me in produce and veered so sharply toward frozen foods you would have thought avocados were contagious. The second time at a cousin's baby shower, where she spent the first hour being very visible and the second hour leaving early after realizing no one was orbiting her the way they used to. Time does something merciless to people who have built themselves out of reflected attention. Eventually, the mirror changes angle. At the shower, she came near me once while I was pouring coffee. She said without looking at me, "You enjoyed that day way too much." I put the creamer down. "If you still think that," I said, "then you heard none of it." She laughed, but it was brittle. "Grandpa made me sound like a monster." "No," I said. "He made you sound observed." That shut her up. She left 20 minutes later. I did not feel triumphant watching her go. Mostly I felt tired. We had spent so many years as unwilling characters in the same family script that sometimes even speaking to her felt like stepping back into old furniture. But I also felt something steadier under the tiredness. Relief, because her version no longer outranked mine. Because truth, once witnessed widely enough, stops needing constant defense. That was the real inheritance Grandpa left me. Not just the house. Not the accounts. Not the authority of being executor. He left me a corrected reality with legal force behind it. He left me proof that presence counts, that invisible work is still work, that character can be recognized even if recognition comes late, and that the people who benefit most from your silence will always call your clarity cruelty. The house changed with me. I tore up the old hallway carpet and found hardwood worth saving underneath. I repainted the spare bedroom and turned it into a small office with Grandpa's metal filing cabinet against one wall and his war photo framed above it. I fixed the cabinet hinges in the kitchen and replaced the faucet he had cursed at for 6 years. The front room stayed mostly the same. His recliner remained in the corner for a long time because removing it felt too much like announcing to the room that he was not just dead, but gone. On Sundays, I still made coffee in his old drip machine, even though it brewed too hot and too slowly. I sat at the maple table and went through mail, budgets, grocery lists, and work files with the same calm he used to bring to every small task. Not because I was becoming him. Because peace leaves habits behind if you pay attention. Sometimes I talked to him out loud without meaning to. When the furnace made that clanking sound again. When the county sent yet another duplicate tax notice. When the neighbor's dog got loose and dug up my mum's. When I finally learned how to reset the garage door track myself and stood in the driveway laughing because he would have loved the phrase idiot-proof hardware. A person can die and still continue in the grammar of your days. That first Christmas in the house, I invited Denise and Aaron over instead of going to my parents' place. We ate ham, laughed too hard over a collapsed pie crust, and played old country songs while snow collected at the edges of the porch. It was the least performative holiday I had ever had. No comparison. No ranking. No anxious glances toward Lila to assess the emotional weather of the room. Just food, warmth, and people who understood that showing up mattered more than sparkle. Mom texted Merry Christmas. Miss you. I texted Merry Christmas back. That was all. The world did not end. That's another thing no one tells you when you start drawing honest boundaries with family. You expect thunder, ruin, cosmic punishment. What often happens instead is quieter. Some people pout, some people gossip, some relationships thin out and reveal they were mostly theater anyway. But your own life, if it is built carefully enough, keeps going. Sometimes it gets better in the exact spaces where you feared it would collapse. By the second spring, the house no longer felt inherited. It felt lived in. Mine. The peonies along the side path came back. I sanded the porch swing and repainted the mailbox. I found an old recipe card in Grandma's handwriting tucked inside a church cookbook and cried over meatloaf directions like they were scripture. Grief does that. It lowers your threshold for ordinary relics. One night, long after dark, a storm knocked out the power across the neighborhood. I lit candles, wrapped myself in a blanket, and sat at the kitchen table listening to rain hit the windows. The house creaked the way old houses do when weather remembers them personally. I thought about the girl I used to be. The one on the curb outside choir rehearsal. The one standing in the background of family photos holding paper plates. The one in the chapel at the back row with numb hands, watching her sister sit in the chair that had been promised to her. I wanted to reach back through time and tell that girl something simple. You are not imagining it. You are not too sensitive. You are not difficult because the unfairness lands on you instead of passing through. And one day, somebody who saw everything will say so out loud. Not everybody gets that. I know it. Not everyone receives a legal correction. Not everyone gets the dead to speak on their behalf through church speakers and careful paperwork. Most people who do the invisible carrying never hear their name honored in public. Most people just keep going, and the world keeps miscrediting the labor. That is partly why I tell this story at all. Not because I need revenge retold. Not because I enjoy replaying my family's humiliation. I tell it because I know what it feels like to have your steadiness mistaken for needlessness. I know what it feels like to become useful in a family instead of loved. I know the private fury of hearing a sibling praised for a performance built on tasks you were quietly doing all along. And I know what it felt like to hear one clear voice say, I saw it. I saw you. I am not letting them misname this after I'm gone. That kind of witness can reroute a life. I still have the digital copy of Grandpa's recording. Pastor Miller gave it to me a week after the funeral, in a plain envelope, almost apologetically, as if he understood he was handing over more than audio. I listened to it only twice after the funeral. Once alone in the house at the maple table. Once the night I moved Grandpa's recliner out of the front room and into the spare bedroom because I was finally ready for the space to change. The second time I listened, one line hit me differently. Private truth never traveled well in this family. When I first heard it in the chapel, I heard the sadness in it. Later, I heard the diagnosis. He was right. In families like mine, truth was allowed only if it arrived in forms that protected comfort, whispered, softened, interpreted, deferred until no one had to feel too exposed. Meanwhile, the false stories traveled first class. Lila is devoted. Sadie is distant. Lila is fragile. Sadie is fine. Lila needs support. Sadie can manage. Private truth does not travel well when the public lie has better manners. Grandpa solved that in the only way left to him. He took it public. He used the room they would care about most. The perde. Not the borm, that the bori, that the church, the funeral, the audience they respected. He knew exactly what he was doing. And because he was him, he still managed to do it without spectacle. He did not invent anything. He just removed the padding. I think my parents still struggle more with the exposure than with the loss. Money, property, those things they can understand. They can tell themselves Grandpa was stubborn. They can tell themselves I got lucky. They can tell themselves legal documents have a coldness that overrides emotion. But the recording left no such escape. It did not just change ownership. It changed witness. People heard. People knew. People looked back over years of church suppers, holiday photos, hospital updates, and social media captions and realized they had been watching the wrong daughter carry the wrong story. That is harder to forgive. Maybe that is why my mother still sends me photo memories every few months. A Christmas from years ago, a 4th of July on the porch, a childhood birthday with all of us smiling into the same sun. She is trying, I think, to prove there was something real there worth recovering. And maybe there was. Families are not made only of cruelty. That is what keeps people loyal to broken systems so long. There were casseroles after breakups, car rides home from school, a few good birthdays. My mother braided my hair when I was little. My father taught me how to change a tire. Lila once slept on the floor beside my bed after I had my wisdom teeth out and felt miserable enough to cry over mashed potatoes. But love without accuracy becomes dangerous. It gives everyone just enough memory to deny the pattern. I do not deny the good. I just no longer let it erase the rest. That balance is harder than anger, but better. Anger burns hot and clear and makes you feel powerful for a while. Accuracy is quieter. It asks more of you. It requires you to hold the full ledger without editing for comfort. My family was not evil. They were lazy in the exact places love demands effort. They were vain. They were biased toward what looked polished. They confused ease with worth. They let the child who complained least become the child who received least. And they did that long enough that it became architecture. Grandpa saw the structure. Then he left me enough truth, enough paper, and enough backbone to stop living under it. Sometimes I sit at the maple table with his note unfolded beside my coffee and think about that sentence. Do not let anybody use family as a crowbar. It took me years to understand how often that had happened. Family as pressure. Family as excuse. Family as emotional blackmail. Family as the reason I should stay quiet, stay helpful, stay available, stay forgiving, stay backgrounded, stay easily reached when labor was needed, and gently bypassed when credit was distributed. No more. That is not bitterness. That is adulthood with the lights on. If I learned anything from the funeral, it is this: the truth does not become cruel just because it arrives after a long season of being convenient to ignore. A chair is not only a chair if everyone in the room knows what it symbolizes. A will is not only a legal document if it also functions as witness. A voice played through chapel speakers can be more merciful than years of polite silence, because at least mercy tells the truth about the wound. Grandpa did. He told it plain. He left me the chair. He left me the house. He left me the right to stop apologizing for being the one who stayed. And in the end, that was worth more than anything sitting in a bank account or folded into a deed file, because property can be sold, money can be spent. But once somebody has looked straight at your life and said, I know what happened here, something inside you settles into place that no one gets to bargain away again. I still miss him. That part has not become poetic. I miss stupid things. The way he cleared his throat before disagreeing with me. The way he called every weather forecast a rumor until proven otherwise. The way he kept hard candy in his coat pocket until it fused to the wrapper. The way his house sounded at 6 a.m. before coffee. The way he would say well, like a whole opinion had just put on work boots. Missing him is ordinary now, which is sometimes harder than the sharp grief was. But it is clean. It does not carry confusion anymore. It does not carry the old fear that I imagined the imbalance, or exaggerated it, or somehow failed a test everyone else understood. He removed that uncertainty for me. That may be the greatest kindness anyone has ever done on my behalf. A gray morning, a chapel, a chair, a recording, a glass hitting stone. That was the day my family stopped being allowed to tell the story without me in it.